But first, with the communist Chinese government's behaviour just getting worse and worse, with the rule of law now abrogated in Hong Kong, daily intrusions into Taiwanese airspace by Chinese fighter planes, reports that China is resorting to forced sterilisation of its Muslim Uyghur population, and routine denunciations by regime mouthpieces of Australia and the West, it's little wonder that Scott Morrison thinks we are in the echoes of the 1930s at the moment. As always, the best way to stop a bully is to make him fear the consequences of his bad behaviour. The Chinese regime needs to know that cracking down on Hong Kong, threatening Taiwan and brutalising minorities can't coexist with business as usual from countries like us. So it's good that the Morrison government has this week boosted our cyber defences, including our ability to take down other countries' systems if needs be. It's also good that we're beefing up our military's offensive capability with longer range missiles. I just wish we could get some new submarines into the water more quickly than the middle of the 2030s, and I hope there is genuinely a plan B should the strategic environment darken any further. On the question of what we can do to help the people of Hong Kong facing more threats this week following the passage of controversial new national security laws imposed by the Chinese government, there's more to this than meets the eye. Now, as you know, I'm no fan of our recent record immigration levels, but sometimes humanitarian and strategic considerations outweigh short-term economic downsides. And there's no doubt that Chinese people from Hong Kong, educated in English and committed to the rule of law, would readily adapt to life here and quickly become wonderful Australians. I guess I just share concerns others have about what happens to Hong Kong if its best and bravest proponents of democracy abandon their homeland, and what that does to our region more generally. In all of this, I hope the Morrison government weighs up targeted sanctions being levelled at key Chinese sectors and personnel, like those imposed on senior members of the Russian government after its covert invasion of the Crimea. But on top of all our recent trauma, drought, fire, disease, and of course this shutdown, we now need to accept that there will be further significant costs here if the tension with China gets worse, or even if it gets no worse than a cold peace. It seems that our military spending is now going towards 2.5% of GDP, and that means less we have to spend on other services. Reducing our dependence on China will mean paying more for many products, even if it eventually restores more manufacturing to this country. I know we've talked about it here many times before, but bringing back manufacturing back into Australia, we say we all want it to happen. Well, we need to have a tough conversation as Australians. That means we pay more for products, and if we don't, our words are pretty hollow. For sectors heavily reliant on China, such as higher education and tourism, they'll need to readjust to the reality of the Chinese government's ability to turn it on and turn it off like a tap. And in the medium term, it's highly likely that China will try to source more of its resource imports from countries in Africa and Latin America that can more readily be bought. This is all going to cast a further cloud over the already fraught years ahead for our national finances as the Australian economy adjusts to business belt tightening and the eventual withdrawal of pandemic-driven subsidies. In all of this, I just have to reiterate just how important it will be not to send mixed messages to the bullies in Beijing. So while the Victorian Labor government is quite rightly regarded as a bit of a national embarrassment at the moment for its scandalous mismanagement of quarantine hotels, and with the Victorian spike in corona cases putting the national recovery at risk, let's not forget that in a week where our national government is spending around $300 billion to better protect us from the growing threat of China, this is a state, Victoria, still knee-deep in secret deal negotiations with Beijing. We've all seen the mess the Victorian Labor has made of managing this pandemic, and their Labor Party branches as well. Let's not forget those branch stacking allegations. Surely it's time this whole push for a Belt and Road deal with China gets ended without further delay. I know the Prime Minister is trying to avoid fights with premiers as part of his national cabinet love-in, but enough's enough. Taxpayers can't be going further into debt nationally to protect us from China if this bloke in Victoria is so hell-bent on borrowing billions from them at the same time.